talk to us about what needs to be done by policymakers, by industry, and of course by consumers as well at end. Mr. Pai, thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us this morning. The big focus and the big talking point of these expectations is the government's commitment to improve logistics and create robust rural and urban infrastructure. From somebody who represents the industry, from somebody who's seen many budgets, in the past, what do you think is most critical? And as an industry representative, what is it that you're expecting, or what would you like seen in this budget?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm very glad to share my perspective overall about the industry and the budget. I think primarily, even the interim budget hinted towards continuation of the development agenda of basically capex growth, infrastructure growth, and also industrial growth. So I think it's a validation of what the previous governments have been consistently doing, and it will eventually lead to further India moving towards a more manufacturing economy through better infrastructure, so the logistics cost coming down. Make in India initiative will get a further boost and fillip. So I think just a continuation and consistency of the agenda of growth, infrastructure, urban development is what we look forward to as the major highlights.
Right. Mr. Pai, thank you for, just introducing that piece of it for me. One thing that we've noticed over the last couple of months has been that the PSU space in the public sector seems to be in good shape. The problem that is arising in the economy is the private sector at this stage. We aren't very often understanding or hearing about the kind of capex plans that private companies are making. What do you think needs to be done to encourage the private sector to lead from the front now?
I think if from where I sit and I see the private sector capex is growing. In fact, I would say it's growing at double digits. There's a lot of growth. If you look at the steel industry, is investing substantially in capacity addition. The capacity utilization across multiple industries is very strong, above 75%. And, I think that coupled with a lot of focus from multinational global brands and companies to use India as their preferred manufacturing hub is leading to a lot of investments. And, if you look at the sectors like semiconductor, electronics, data centers, and a lot of this, fourth generation manufacturing, as well as the increase in capacity on basic building blocks like cement and steel. I think the public sector capex might, be growing silently. Maybe it's not as prominent and you don't get the data as consistently as you get in a, central budget. The union budget, but I think that growth is strong, and again, it's based on a very strong policy framework of Make in India.
Right. Mr. Pai, it's always the old economy when you think infrastructure, right? You think roads and railways. That's the first thing that comes to your mind when you're thinking infrastructure, you're thinking budget. But we, as a country, as a nation, we quickly need to jump on the bandwagon of reducing carbon footprint, moving to green hydrogen, battery storage. And I think private players may be able to take the lead in this space. What do you think this budget can do to encourage that as a vertical or a business as a whole?
I think it's a very, very relevant question, and as we have made the commitments as a nation, and the global commitments also coming out of COP28, I think there is a case for rapid acceleration of investments in the green economy. I think sectors like green hydrogen, green ammonia, batteries, is solar panel manufacturing. These are all sectors which are significantly growing at this point in time. So I would say that there have been incentives. For example, the India Semiconductor Mission, the India Semiconductor Policy is promoting a lot of investments in electronics and semiconductors. Similarly, the PLI on green hydrogen, I think had made a good start by the PLI for manufacturing electrolyzers. But I think we will have to further look at investments and having a policy framework for incentives to actually put up green hydrogen and green ammonia facilities. That will be helpful. In addition to that, I think India has done a great job scaling up the renewable capacity, especially on the solar side. At this point in time, I think more than a third of our energy comes from renewable, which is, I think, a very strong indicator and growth. But it needs to be 24/7 available. And that's where I think investments in battery technologies, investment in pump storage hydros, more incentives around this will help rapidly decarbonize and meet the goal which India has and many corporations have. So I think it's a great opportunity to look at in this budget as to the whole, what are the various building blocks for this. And there are many building blocks. I think one of them is the sustainable aviation fuel. For example, Europe, UK and the US have mandates for, sustainable aviation fuel blending. In fact, Europe and UK have mandates of a certain percentage. Europe is 6% by 2030 and UK is 10%. And while the US has given green credits to use sustainable aviation fuel, so incentives. So we can learn from all of this and look at what are the various sectors and building blocks for rapidly decarbonizing the economy. There are various opportunities, including green construction, green buildings, more investments of, different type of, material used in construction, technologies used. So I think we have to be more forward-looking, futuristic in terms of sustainably building the economy.
Mr. Pai, the big picture is always made up of small actionables. And I hear you where you say we need to swiftly move and focus, to reduce carbon footprint and incentivize industry to do that. What do you think in terms of actionables could the budget deliver to immediately boost that? So while I get the bigger picture, in actionables, what is imperative at this stage to boost this space?
I think a very strong tracking mechanism might help. For example, when we spoke about green hydrogen, there is a PLI for electrolyzer manufacturer, as I said. So what is the target for converting it into actual green hydrogen capability? So, targets around how much of this is actionable year on year and, put targets for 2030 and, then drive more, look at if it is not happening, why it is not happening. So is it a missing skill gap? Is it a missing technology gap? Is it a missing framework, policy framework, which needs to be further strengthened? So, intense dialogue around this with the industry as to, now these mandates are there. What does it take to actually convert? And then in each of this, put target. And then, what's the next step? What does the industry do? What do the regulators do to make it work better and meet those mandates? So I give example of green hydrogen. Similarly, the biofuel space, the 2G ethanol. We now have a mandate for 20%. What does it take to get there? We got to 10%, the 10% mandate, I think, ahead of time. So what do we do to get to that? How do we promote 2G? What's the technology framework? Some of the Indian companies who are developing technologies, how can we promote that? How can big corporations sponsor them and, take that forward? I think a more robust tracking mechanism and target setting will help us, actualize what is on the planning stage.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Pai. Of course, we will love to chat with you on Budget Day and see whether or not that wish list gets fulfilled. But until then, good luck and we'll see you soon.
When the whole day passes like a blur the news just whizzes past, and you're trying to stay informed. It is our job to bring you news that truly matters. At Profit 360, we cut through the clutter, the long street deals, finance and policy news that could shape your tomorrow. The newsmakers, the trendsetters, and the innovators. In 30 minutes, we've got you covered. So stay ahead, stay informed, and stay profitable with Profit 360.
एक ही लक्ष्य, नेशन फर्स्ट, एक ही इरादा, 2047 विकसित भारत।
Welcome to Budget Trades. Today we have with us a very special guest, Vinayak Chatterjee, founder and managing trustee, the Infra Foundation. Mr. Chatterjee, of course, is a very significant voice in the sector, in the country, and to do with anything and everything infrastructure. Mr. Chatterjee, thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure to have you on the show in the run-up to the Big Bang budget. Firstly, Mr. Chatterjee, do you feel the government's strong tax collection and dividends from the RBI could mean the allocation to infra could exceed the interim budget figures, or do you feel like it could be more of a welfare-led budget this time around?
No. Your question is bang on. I think there is no question that the allocations to infrastructure sector will be the maximum possible given the fiscal space. And the fiscal space is actually amenable to diversion or shall we say allocation to core infra, because there is significant revenue buoyancy, as we have seen. There is another reason also that this government has consistently been following the stance that public expenditure on infrastructure is actually pump priming economic growth. That mantra has not changed. And, very simply, a very senior member of the finance ministry shared over the media interactions after the last budget announcement that they have confidential information that 3 rupees spent on infrastructure results in 3 rupees of GDP growth, whereas 1 rupee spent on direct benefit transfer type of allocations results in 90 paisa of GDP growth. So with private investment still not showing the desired mojo, I don't think the government has any choice but to put significant outlays into public works, basically into core infrastructure. And to directly answer your question, we in the sector are expecting a 30% increase from the last year's full budget. Last year's full budget was 10 lakh crores, and we are now expecting a 30% increase to 13 lakh crores. I am discounting the increase from 10 to 11.1 in the interim budget, which I thought was just a holding operation and an arithmetical exercise. So I'm discounting that. But now that we are talking about the next 5 years of the government, we are talking about a full year budget. We are talking about infrastructure continuing to be the pump primer of economic growth, which the government desperately requires for job creation and its multiplier effects. My expectation is that we are going to see a 30% increase to 13 lakh crores in this budget. But over to you.
Wow, Mr. Chatterjee, I think if that happens, the street for sure, for one, will be very excited. But I take your point. It's the only way that we're going to reach the goalpost that we've set out for the country over the next 5 years. But, break this down for me, right? So while I know the trust, the demand, the commitment of the government is to improve logistics and create robust rural and urban infrastructure, this additional 30% that you're expecting to come in, what sectors could be the key beneficiaries? Some argue that one needs to go beyond roads and railways. Airports, urban infrastructure, energy sector, sustainable development infrastructure should also be as important and critical.
You're right. The question is, I think there are some trends to watch out for, which I think may become explicit in the budget. The first is, you are right in your observation that roads, the focus on roads over the last almost 2.5 decades has led to a certain maturity of the sector. There is a fairly decent road connectivity, and obviously rational amounts of allocations need to be given to the roads and highways sector to carry on the good work. But I personally believe that this budget, you are going to see an increasing emphasis of budgetary allocation over for railways over road, and that gap has got getting narrower by the year. And now this year, let us see. I think the allocation for rail will exceed road. So fingers crossed on that one. The other trends to watch is that you are again right. I think we need to move to certain sectors that are crying out for attention. First, in my view, would be water. And I hope there are significant allocations for public works in water, whether it is resuscitation of water bodies or cleaning Ganga or cleaning rivers or inland transportation or minor or major irrigation works, and including allocations for urban water supply. So water is a critical issue, and then is the allocation for green energy. Now, all the discussions on green energy have been historically about putting in more incentives and an attractive ecosystem for manufacture and installation of solar modules and wind. That has certainly gained momentum. I think the crucial issue now is moving to transmission infrastructure, because most of these solar and wind are in remote places. So a focus on allocations for transmission infrastructure to evacuate the power, and equally importantly, a focus in the energy sector on developing and encouraging storage. The expectation is now that the green energy will not just be when the sun shines or the wind blows, but 24/7, even at night, even in the evening hours. So there are two critical areas of storage that are currently under development, which is battery storage systems, we call BESS, battery energy storage systems, and PSP, pump storage projects. Both of these require focus and allocation in the coming budget. So green energy with emphasis on storage and water, and an increasing allocation of rail over road. And finally, I would say that we have had an experience of more than almost, once again, 2.5 decades on PPP systems for core infrastructure, PPP frameworks that attract private capital. And I think that learning now needs to move to the social infrastructure sector. And you asked me a question on social infra. I think the time has come to develop creative PPP formats to enable private capital to come into the health and education sectors. But over to you.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because PPP is the one talking point, and that's probably one of the ways to encourage private players from taking the forefront and leadership here. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I was talking to a couple of infra companies, and they said if India is to achieve the goal of being a manufacturing hub, logistic costs need to be brought down. Currently, logistic costs in India is 16 to 17%, which is much higher than the global average of 10 to 11%. If railways has got to be the focus, in your opinion, what sort of a commitment should the government be making for additions of railways, or adding more bullet trains, maybe focus on different geographies? What is that goalpost? What is a commitment that you would be seeking and that you think would be good enough to get us to what we achieve to aspire?
Look, the figures that I have from the national, the point is, let me just step back. I think this is not really a budget item. It is an area where the government has already shown significant commitment. In 2022, the government announced a comprehensive national logistics policy, which sought to bring down the logistics costs of 13% currently as a percentage of GDP, down to about reduction by 5 percentage points, down to about 8. Now, the figures are under debate. Some people say it is down from 13 to 8 or 11 to 6. So the moot point is that there is a concerted effort to bring logistics costs down by 5 percentage points of GDP. And there are a slew of measures that have been announced in the national logistics policy that includes new dedicated freight corridors. It talks about multimodalism. It talks about a significant enhancement of warehouse infrastructure. It talks about road, rail, port connectivity. So it talks about cold chain. So there are a variety of interventions on logistics cost. And I think that matter has already been dealt with in the national logistics policy. So the question is whether the budget also makes a reference to it, and maybe, earmarks certain amount of allocations for multimodalism or stuff like that. But over to you.
Right. So I completely get your point on railways, roads as well. We've seen a little bit of an uptake with implementation. So actually, let's talk about roads before I move on to airports. Roads also very significant. It's also an important sort of logistical tool in that sense. And what we've seen recently is that while awards and commitments are there, implementation is what was behind the curve. But recently with JNPT's implementation that we saw, how important is it, in your opinion? Intent is one thing, but execution, implementation, timely implementation is probably even more critical at this juncture.
I wouldn't worry about the pace of implementation on roads. Sometimes it hits high targets, sometimes for various reasons it slows down, but it is going at an even pace. And I think the huge slew of greenfield expressways that have just been completed, like Delhi, Mumbai, and Amritsar, Mumbai, Amritsar, Katra, etc., there is a fairly ongoing program. And it is not just about focus of NHAI. Remember, states themselves have taken a great initiative. The Mumbai-Nashik road is an initiative of the Maharashtra government. There are 3 major expressways under the UP government. So increasingly, we are seeing that states themselves are taking great initiatives in developing modern roads. So I wouldn't worry about the pace of implementation of roads. I would certainly look forward to railways being spotlighted in terms of new dedicated freight corridors, in terms of high-speed rail, in terms of their increasing their share of cargo with creative policies and multimodalism and various other policy initiatives. I would certainly like to see an increasing focus on railways and including the challenge of the railways for a change, actually succeeding in inviting private capital into some of the PPP projects where historically railways have really not shown any great aptitude or success in PPP.
How important, in your opinion, is it to build on urban infrastructure and airports? Is that also the need of the hour, you think?
Extremely important. I think the Indian middle class has shown that air travel is no more a luxury. It is providing a source of mobility and connectivity, not just in mainland areas, but even across remote parts of the country. Airport development has been a happy story. The large airports have attracted private capital, including FDI. For example, the Jewar Airport in Greater Noida has 100% FDI from Zurich. Other larger groups are investing in airports. I understand a bid for 23 new airports is almost ready to be launched to invite bids. So airport development is actually going well. I think the problem is more with the airlines' capacity and pricing and issues there. But airport work is going well. And I would like to commend the government for the strides that have been made on the airport side. But with your permission, may I touch on a topic which you raised earlier, which is about the response to the government in a situation of healthy tax collections and revenue buoyancy. May I go ahead?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay, so there is an important point which we have been making for almost 3 years now, which we want the government to take seriously. It is not necessarily a budget issue, but it is a subject that certainly merits mention as a policy initiative in the budget speech, but to be taken up in the GST Council. And I'm talking about the very high GST on a product called cement. Cement attracts 28% GST. Now, 28% is what is popularly in GST parlance called a sin tax. Now, does it make sense to have the basic infrastructure, intermediate and commodity cement, which is at one end a very, very Aam Aadmi product? People are converting kacha houses to pakka. At the same time, it is the single most important ingredient in any civil construction, infra or personal projects across the country. What is the sense in having a GST at 28%? So the plea to the finance minister has been to actually take stock of this suggestion, make a mention in the budget speech to say that the suggestion has merit and that it will be suitably be taken up in the GST Council. It will benefit the government also because the largest spend in the government is on infrastructure. And if cement becomes cheaper, the government itself can take its own budget, many steps forward. So I rest this case with you.
Oh, right. I mean, that is it's shocking. Cement, which is such an important and significant ancillary in infrastructure, is being, dealing with high GST. Another point that somebody from the cement sector mentioned is that a dedicated policy for capex or green power usage or incentivizing plan is also important for this industry, because I believe they are involved in many activities to reduce carbon footprint. Do you feel like that's also something that could help the sector in a material way?
Look, encouraging green policy or helping policies that help increase the percentage of green energy consumption in total energy basket has ramifications across all industry. So I would not encourage a policy specifically given for the cement sector, but yes, such a policy would be welcome across sectors. Talking about, there are two topics I want to touch upon. One is that we have information that the World Bank and the multilateral development banks, with the leadership of the World Bank, are keen to engage the government of India to structure participatively a green energy transition fund. Now, taking a country like India from existing fossil fuel regime to a green regime involves a lot of pain and a lot of transitioning financing. I'm not getting into the detail because that's not the intent right now, but making the point that transiting to a green energy regime from a fossil fuel regime has lots of financial related pain, and a green energy transition fund would be extremely welcome from the economy. So the fact that people like the World Bank have made, shall we say, have encouraged the government to work with the multilateral financing system to create a green energy transition fund, I think the finance minister could possibly have a policy statement to say that we're keen and that we would like to work in a participatory approach with people like the World Bank anchoring the initiative and the government doing whatever is necessary. So I would actually look forward to a broader program about a green energy transition fund with the help of multilateral development banks and the finance ministry and the government of India to actually grapple with the larger canvas of what such change requires. Over to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chatterjee, for uncomplicating this conversation and helping our viewers understand what is the need of the hour in terms of expectations from the budget. I would love to chat with you, of course, dissecting the budget after it's announced. So until then, thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
When the whole day passes like a blur, the news just whizzes past, and you're trying to stay informed. It is our job to bring you news that truly matters. At Profit 360, we cut through the clutter, the long street deals, finance and policy news that could shape your tomorrow. The newsmakers, the trendsetters, and the innovators. In 30 minutes, we've got you covered. So stay ahead, stay informed, and stay profitable with Profit 360.